Now, as Europe marks the 80th anniversary of the D-Day commemorations, the symbolic significance of this event is more relevant than ever amidst current geopolitical tensions.
So to discuss how the legacy of the D-Day underscores the power of democracy against dictatorship and the need for unity in today's world, we have with us Andrew Tettenborn from Swansea University. Hello, sir, and welcome to TVP World.
Good morning.
So I want to ask a broader question first, and I leave the specifics to Don. How does the legacy of the D-Day resonate with the current geopolitical situation in Europe, particularly with the conflict in Ukraine?
I think, unfortunately, it's becoming less relevant as time goes on. What I think we shall see is that this is essentially the last time we will have serious commemorations of D-Day. Let me explain why. One point is that this is the last major anniversary of D-Day when any number of people who participated are still alive. Anyone who participated in D-Day will, I think, be at least 97 this year. Next time, in 5 years' time, they will be 102. As this fades from folk memory, I fear it will also fade from national memory. The other point, of course, is a simple technical one. I doubt if we're likely any time in the foreseeable future to see a case where one imperialist state occupies the whole of a continent and needs to be dislodged. So, in a sense, D-Day represents a form of warfare, a form of geopolitics, which we're not likely to see again.
Well, that is indeed interesting. Now, I'd like to, and it'll be interesting to see moving forward, but I'd like to look back at the 75th anniversary commemoration. Then Donald Trump was president of the United States. And of course, if we look back to that time, NATO was highly in question, at least according to President Trump. I remember he was trying to push through the 2% spending. And he was criticized at the time for focusing on individual American heroes and not the collective alliance. I think in just 5 years, that has fundamentally changed. Due to the war in Ukraine, we see a renewal of NATO partnership, the alliance, and purpose for the alliance. And so, in that context, what role does that serve today?
I think what you say is actually very pertinent. NATO, I think, is more united than it was 5 years ago. And to that extent, there is some unity of thought as to who is right and who is wrong. Because, of course, the real feature of D-Day was that everybody agreed who was on the side of the angels and who was not. That being the case, there are worrying signs on the horizon. It's by no means a foregone conclusion that Joe Biden will be president next year, and there are worrying signs of isolationism from Donald Trump. And indeed, there are one or two similar signs of less than enthusiasm, say, in Ukraine, in Europe. Notably, Marine Le Pen in France has been less than enthusiastic, or at least sounded less than enthusiastic about Ukraine. And she and others who think like her may very well do quite well in the European elections, which began today.
Mm-hmm. Certainly, well, that's something we'll be keeping an eye on. I'd like to remind our viewers we're looking at live images right now of the D-Day commemorations. And moving on, Vladimir Putin has not been invited this time around.
Well, that's understandable.
It is understandable, but is this the new normal moving forward, not to involve Russia? And do you think the perception in Europe, due to what's happened in Ukraine and basically the perception here in Central and Eastern Europe of Russia as an aggressor, is settling in with our Western European friends?
Well, I think for the foreseeable future, this must be right. Certainly, while we have the war in Ukraine, I think it highly likely that Russia will not be invited. And this also applies because Russia has increasingly been looking away from Europe towards the East. It's very noticeable that as the West becomes vociferous, as it begins to tear itself apart, or at least the US begins at times to tear itself apart, we have glasses clinking between Beijing and Moscow. So unless and until we have a major realignment of the Russian government, I think Russia will not be part of this. And of course, one has to remember China was on the side of the angels in the Second World War. But hell will freeze over, I suspect, before China takes part in celebrations of this sort in the foreseeable future.
Certainly, that will be an interesting sight. And tying now the history and the present time, now tying them together, how do you see now the Western world's response to authoritarian threats today compared to the ones of Allied forces' unity during World War II?
This again is worrying. My feeling is that we're in a time a little bit like the late 1930s, where the West is beginning to wake up to the fact that the threat from authoritarianism actually is very real. The threat from the authoritarianism of Russia, China, which could ally themselves with destabilizers like Iran and so on. I think the West is beginning to wake up. I think it needs to wake up much faster if it is to avoid the kind of cataclysm that we saw in 1939.
Okay, well, Andrew Tettenborn, law professor at Swansea University, thank you for joining us and thank you for your insight. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.